Okay, Psych 250 students, here we go with Chapter 14, Personality Psychopathology. Here we get a sense of what your personality is like. Do you have a personality that's pretty strong? Is it mellow? Do you get along fairly well with other people? This frog you must be in touch with your inner tadpole, kind of going back, trying to figure out, who am I, right? Of course, our early start seems to mold and shape our personality. Sigmund Freud believed that by age 6 we develop into the person that we are now. Other people more recently said, no, it happens much earlier. And now we've even changed a little bit. We used to believe that our personality was set for a lifetime. And now others are saying, maybe not. Maybe we change dramatically. So I'll talk about my first case study. The names are Cheng and Ing. Here's an early, eventually became Cheng and Ing bunker. Here's an early drawing on what they look like. And I believe Cheng is on the right and Ing is on the left. They were born at that time, what was known as Siam. Today we call it Thailand. And they were born in a very small village, a very poor family, and as conjoined twins, they weren't given much of an opportunity to survive, but they did survive. Word spread that they existed, and a promoter came and found them, and basically offered money to the parents, saying they're not going to have much of a life here, but if you give them to me, I'll make sure that they are cared for and provided for. The parents, being quite poor, accepted his offer, and the promoter went around promoting the so-called Siamese twins. That's where you get the term Siamese twins from these gentlemen. They were quite successful. Not so much them. Their promoter made a lot of money. By age 18, they were smart enough to realize we don't need a promoter anymore. We're adults. So they severed ties with that individual and they went to business on their own. They went and exhibited themselves on their own and made quite a bit of cash. Imagine one of your siblings that you get along with or you don't, and suddenly realizing that you're stuck with them the entire life. Now we're kind of stuck with our siblings our entire life, but I mean literally together. Cheng and Ing were connected by a fiber that extended just below their abdomen, and they had to deal with each other. Here's a picture as they got older. Now, things were going relatively well. They met a couple sisters. They got married to these sisters. They built 2 farms. They had a number of children between the 2 of them. I believe one brother had 12 and the other one had 10. But Cheng, to the right, had a drinking problem, and he bullied his other brother quite a bit. Now, doctors, of course, were very curious about these gentlemen and offered to separate them throughout the years, acknowledging that separating may, in fact, kill them. So they passed on that. We don't have the technology. They didn't have the technology we have today, so it would have possibly killed them. As much as they desperately wanted a life separate from each other, they knew that they were linked together, so to speak, forever. When Chang started drinking and becoming more physically and emotionally abusive to his brother, there wasn't much his brother could do about this. Their interesting lifestyle on their farms was comprised of one brother going to his other brother's farm, spending time with the family, and then vice versa. Now, some of you are already starting to question, well, how can you make all those kids? Well, we don't have to draw pictures or anything, but I think what happened is that the other brother would kind of go into a dissociative state, right? Just kind of blank out, like some of you do during my lectures. Gotcha, right? Chang gets sick. He suffers from a stroke. He's near death. His brother is so frightened, the doctors offer, now's the time that we should separate you. He refuses, and then he dies too. They think he might have died of a heart attack, just the fear that he was going to die right after his brother, which he did. Personality is tied to our upbringing. It's a psychological characteristic. It determines, excuse me, who we are. When it becomes pathological, as usual, it starts to interfere with our work, our school, our relationships. People start avoiding us. People start saying, you're such a, you fill in the blank. Why can't you change? Why does it have to be this way? These characteristics are pretty prevalent throughout the person's life. I mean, think about it. If somebody came up to you and said, you need to change your personality, and you might say, what part of it? And they're like, all of it. You may get a little defensive about that. Definitely defensive about it. So we get into the different clusters. We get into the odd or eccentric behaviors. We get into the dramatic behaviors. We get into the anxious behaviors. And these are aspects of our personality that kind of define what kind of personality disorder we have, how they manifest. Years ago, when we treat personality disorders, we recognized that this person was going to be difficult because we're asking them to address their core being, who they are, and make some changes. And that's pretty dramatic. So let's start with one, antisocial personality disorder. The prisons, primarily men, the prisons are full of antisocial personality disorders, probably never diagnosed. But these individuals think of themselves as the makers of the law. They don't follow man's law, they do their own law. And you can see where that's going to get people into trouble. When they commit acts that we would see as criminal, they don't seem to have any empathy whatsoever. They don't take responsibility. If anything, they blame the victim. Now, what's going on here? Why would society produce people with antisocial personality disorder? Well, there seems to be some, the true honest answer is we don't know all the answers, but there seems to be some genetic influence. We seem to know that environment plays a role. these individuals don't seem to respond to fear stimulus in the same way, so we know that something's going on with the brain. It's not that they're just all bad people. Something is different about them biochemically. They seem to thrive on excitement, sensation seeking. So if you're a type T person, thrill seeker, you have very similar characteristics as somebody with antisocial personality disorder. Now, I'm not making assumptions just because you love roller coasters. That's your antisocial personality disorder. I'm just saying that there are similar circumstances. There's also similar circumstances with folks who abuse substances. Again, trying to get that thrill, going against the rules, so to speak, right? So we have to consider social, environmental consequences of producing antisocial personality disorder. You see that a lot of them have similar traits where they just lack guidance. And so they get used to doing things their way. That carries on through adulthood. You'll see a pattern of oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, and then antisocial personality disorder. Difficult to treat because people don't think they have a problem, as you can imagine. Odd, eccentric behaviors we notice right away because they stand out. People that act very strange in our community are part of this cluster. They can have everything from being detached from society. And so, as we talked about the previous case in the chapter covering schizophrenia spectrum disorders, they may be disconnected socially. Good example is that schizotypal. Again, a lot of these folks are identified as just being strange or weird at times. Eccentric. It's interesting to me that socioeconomically, we label people differently, right? If you're poor, you act very different, you're just crazy. If you're rich and you act very different, you're eccentric. For cluster B, we have more dramatic emotional, and that includes antisocial personality disorder. Again, that's very dramatic. But we also have somebody that's labeled as borderline personality disorder. I hear this term all the time. You're so borderline. This is a pretty explosive personality disorder. Many times, these individuals have issues of trust. They are pretty intense. You're going to find this more common in females than in males. They might be more prone to suicidal gestures or self-destructive behavior. So I'd like to talk about a case study dealing with a borderline personality disorder. And the name of the case is Tina. Tina occurred when I worked at that agency called Crystal Ray in Lansing, Michigan. And as I worked with Tina, she came to me working in a law clinic. And with time, I realized she might have some borderline characteristics. Now I'm going to talk about that next time. Thank you.